Hi guys, it's Miss McHugh here. I thought that instead of you just having to go it alone for preparation for your Greek test on Monday, that I would try my hand at making a screencastify video for you. So I know it gets laborious, it gets boring having to do it by yourself. So hopefully this will help you feel like you're in a classroom. It will help communicate to you the information that you need to know for the test, and hopefully it'll be enjoyable along the way. Okay, so I'm just going to jump right in. Oh, by the way, I really enjoy the little snippets of getting to know you along the way. So I'm very glad that you're in this class. I think it's a fascinating subject, just chock full of information. And how cool that it's the first language ever spoken by human beings is artwork. So I'm glad you're along for the journey. Okay, let's jump right into Greek art. I have a map of Greece up here because I really want you to be cognizant of the fact or aware of the fact that it's completely surrounded by the ocean, right? And so it begs to reason that at the very beginning of human history, as far as Greece goes, that people are completely swarming around the sea. Why? Because it's filled with life, right? It's a food source, it's a traveling source. And so the ocean is really, really important. There were two main people groups that actually came from Greece in the Paleolith, and that were the Mycenaeans and the Cycladic people. And I've given you a couple of examples of artwork here on the screen. This golden mask, I'm sorry about that. I don't know how to stop this nonsense from happening. This golden mask is the mask of Agamemnon from Mycenae, which is on the mainland Greece. And then this little guy right here is a Cycladic stone sculpture, and he came from the islands of Greece. Another really interesting thing, if you look at right here where my pointer is, that's one of the earliest known frescoes, and that came from the Palace of Knossos. And what's really cool about it is it completely talks to, without speaking a word, talks to the domesticity, the expectation of domesticity of women. Because in this fresco, it's called the Bull Leaper. The guy leaping over the bull is really suntanned from being outside, probably a fisherman, who knows what else. And then the women are portrayed as light skinned, which is pretty fascinating. It tells us something about the culture without speaking a word at all. So that would be prehistory in Greece. All right. Oh, I want to go back to here. Right up here, look right here. That's Samothrace, right? We know the winged victory. Right there is the island of Samothrace. Look how close it is to Asia Minor, which is also known as Turkey, right? Pretty amazing. Okay, so I wanted to show you these beehive tombs because when you're thinking about architecture, earliest people that were living in Greece were really innovative. They created these beehive tombs, also known as tholos. And the reason why it's called a beehive tomb is when you look inside this picture over here on the left, it is like a beehive, the way that they constructed it, which is really cool. They've kind of corbelled it up to make this hive-like shape. And then they would cover it with the earth, like you see here and this guy over here, to kind of keep it protected. Obviously, they had great admiration and respect for those that they might be burying. And also they would bury lots of treasure with them as well. There was usually a treasury room attached to these beehive tombs. And so I just wanted to share that with you because advancements are being made all along the way. And this corbelling effect of positioning large stones on the bottom and then stacking them inward to make this beehive shape is going to become monumentally important when we move over to Greek architecture. So just keep that in mind, okay? Everybody learns from the people that came before them, just like us, right? Okay, so there was this period of the Dark Ages that happens before the Golden Age of Greece, and lots of things happened because of it. Let me see if I can move this little screen. Moving myself. Oh, there we go. Okay, and this kind of shows you 1700 BCE, all the way up till the Greeks unwittingly defeat the Persians and the beginning of the Golden Age happens. So you see Mycenaean happens. They actually have an early form of writing that kind of predates cuneiform called Linear B. And so then the Dark Age happens, and then this amazing, amazing Enlightenment, kind of like what happens with the Renaissance later in Western Europe. Okay, so let me move on. Oh, and the class. Oh, golly. So sorry. I forgot I did all of this. The collapse of Mycenaean civilization happens. And obviously, it's monumentally important because everybody just abandons these settlements. All of a sudden, no more kings, right? Populations completely diminish. And nobody really knows why, if there was any kind of plague. Not exactly sure, but also this loss of knowledge. For some reason, when there's these amazing detrimental times in human history, for some reason, all innovation stops and they stop passing the knowledge that they had previously on to future generations. I find that really interesting. Again, we'll see that in Rome with the use of concrete. And then, of course, little recordings and writings exist. And then finally, this amazing time of revival happens with the Greek Golden Ages. All right, so here is archaic art, going all the way up through Hellenistic. And you have to ask yourself the question, why did artists make art this way? What would affect or influence them? Of course, their relationship with global communities. And then, of course, thinking about innovation, thinking about new ideas, like we see with Polykleitos, and then just even pushing the envelopes and exploring their artistic being as well. So, moving from here, thinking about context, it's really important to understand Greek context or civilization and society. Humans really become the measure of all things, right? It's really interesting because, also the very Greek ideal. Greeks think that a sculpture of the human form has to be the full human. When we get over to Roman and they're recreating Greek sculpture, they're fine with just doing a bust sculpture, which means like from here up. But Greeks think that that's a travesty, that you shouldn't separate the head from the body. They have a great intellectual life, strong interest in physical exercise. Obviously, first Olympics ever happened in Greece, which is really cool. The Athenians, of course, we know are creating this idea of democracy, which is monumentally important to the United States and Western civilization because we really take the prompts of what happened in Greece, right there at the Agora, these ideas of democracy, and we use the framework of that to establish the democracy in our own country. By the way, you had to be male and you had to be a landowner to be able to vote or to have a say in anything in Greek culture. And that wasn't just in Athens. Remember, you're thinking about the fact that that Greece at this time is broken up into city-states. There's not just one whole unified country. Immortal gods, right? These gods have flaws, they have emotions, they can be killed, and they interacted with mortals as well. Greece was, I already spoke to that, right? It's not a single nation, but individual city-states. However, even though they're completely diversified and not a unified country, there were several times that they did come together. Athletics brought them together because they were so into competing, which I guess is kind of a way to come together while still being separate. But without this coming together, Greece never, ever would have defeated Persia. And even though they were outnumbered, like 20-1, the Greeks were outnumbered, and yet coming together and being unified led to the victory over the Persians, which led to the Golden Age. All right, so dates are important, and I know this is the most difficult part of art history is remembering dates. Archaic period is 700 to 480 BCE. When you're thinking about sculptural nuances and styles, things that are important to remember, that ever popular archaic smile, kind of that Mona Lisa smile, cat that ate the canary smile. And we'll see this when we move over to Etruscan art in Rome. And in Italy, which is again speaking to the fact that there were global relations happening because so much is borrowed from one country to another. When you're thinking about archaic sculpture, extremely rigid stance, right? It's very reflective of Egyptian, but Greek archaic sculpture were almost always nude, and you never saw that in Egyptian sculpture, they at least had their little pharaonic kilt on, if you will. There was a little blip on the radar screen called the severe style that fell between the archaic and the classical. And during this time, believe it or not, is the very time that Critias Boy comes during this intermediate period, also known as the severe period. Then the classical period happens, right? This boom of knowledge, this boom of architecture and artwork, just kind of like the Renaissance. And then Hellenistic, we're pushing, and classical, you've got ideal form, contrapposto, polykleidos canon, very formal approach. Then you have Hellenistic, and Hellenistic is so fantastic. This extreme emotion and theatricality, right? You've got the dying people, and you've got people that are poor and broken. And for the first time, you're really seeing the human condition, right? We're messy. We've got all kinds of things that affect us in life. And for the first time ever, artists are rendering this in Hellenistic art, which I think is amazingly wonderful. And it's hyper realistic. This is the period where we see tons and tons of drapery, and it's actually known as wet drapery because it looks like you've dipped it in water and laid it across the human body. It shows every nuance of form, even though it is clothed. So it's quite lovely. Images that you need to know for the test, and this is important, right? This is the Athenian Agora, the birthplace of democracy. However, prior to it having anything to do with government buildings, it was a marketplace. All of these buildings spread out here were used for market. And then we have these civic buildings. Civic buildings would include any place that would be a public gathering space. So you have civic buildings that are happening here. And this whole list at the bottom of your screen kind of explains all of these buildings. If you look in the back right-hand corner, right up here, that would be the Acropolis. And the Acropolis it's really bizarre when you're in Athens because it's this big rock that literally just juts up out of nowhere. And it's really peculiar to see in the middle of this major metropolitan city. But there it is, right there. So you can imagine being up there on top of the Acropolis. You can look down on the Agora and all the happenings that are there. You can look out and see if anyone's coming. And of course, they in turn can look up and go, oh my gosh, look at this amazing society that's constructed this beautiful white sparkling temple, and all of these other structures that are sitting on top of the Acropolis. So this is the Agora, right? Moving on to Greek vase painting. Greek vase, obviously, ceramics were important because you used them for storing foods. Olive oil in particular, wine, of course, was important in Greek society. And then they thought instead of just making them utilitarian, they also became works of art. Potters and painters were separate. There would be one group of artists who were actually constructing the vessels, and they used the pottery wheel. Remember, that was created or invented in Neolithic times. So they're using the pottery wheel to create these gorgeous forms. And then painters who were skilled in painting representation of human form, the vessels would be passed on to them, and they would have the job of actually painting the scenery on the Greek vases themselves. Remember, red figure technique is where you have red clay figures painted in red on black. What you're seeing here in the picture is actually a black figure technique, which of course you can surmise that it would be using black clay to paint on red clay ground. And so the red clay figures, when you're thinking about red clay, figures painted in red, little details painted in black, to show negative space, to show things like the strands of hair, texture of baskets, etc. Black figure technique is pretty much the reverse of red figure technique. And they were often, when you think about red clay, you could paint the black clay, liquid black clay called slip, over the surface of the red clay, and then you could scrape into the clay to actually carve around the shape of your figure and reveal the red clay underneath it. And that's really what you see here. So if you think about this whole area right here was at one time covered with black slip, liquid clay, and then they would literally carve around it to kind of like erasing that black slip to reveal the figure underneath. All right, some people that you need to know when it comes to vase painting. Oops, skipped ahead. You got Exachias. Exachias was known as the master of black figure painting. And Exachias, he was masterful. He signed his name on his pottery, which I think is really cool. For the first time ever, we're seeing signed artwork. And he has this student named Antichides, and Antichides wanted to show his master up. So Exachias has this black figure style. Up until this point, there is no red figure style until you have his student Antichides. And so Antichides, they both are creating these scenes with Ajax and Achilles playing a dice game. Exachias executes this in black figure style, and Achilles decides to do black figure and red figure on the same vessel, just to kind of show his teacher, like, look at me, aren't I cool? I'm better than you. Which, of course, as a teacher, is what you want as your for your students. You want them to be better and more prolific at whatever it is you're teaching them. That means you're a successful teacher, right? All right, so moving on, we have the Niobid painter. And the Niobid painter, we really don't know the name. This is actually called the Niobid painter because of the location in which it was found. The Niobid painter, all of a sudden, there's something really different happening here. When you look at this vessel and the way that the figures are painted, all of a sudden there's no ground, right? They're not all standing on the same ground. In fact, it seems somewhat chaotic, this placement of figures. This vessel is called a calyx. It's kind of this flower-shaped calyx crater, and it was used for mixing water and wine. When you would have events or gatherings, you wouldn't give people straight wine because they would become intoxicated. However, they needed something to drink. So you would mix water with the wine, and the wine had kind of antiseptic properties in that it would kill bacteria in the water and kind of make it obviously more tasty, but it was also quite beneficial to maybe helping a water source that wasn't pure and could have been filled with some bacteria and things like that. When you look at these paintings are in action. And for the same time, this idea of having a single ground is rejected. The story of this vessel is interesting. On the front, there is a story of Niobe, right? Oh, hello. That's why we call it the Niobid painter, because he's painting this scene. Niobe is immortal, and she has 14 kids, right? So lots and lots of children. And she decides that she is going to kind of make fun of Apollo and Artemis's mother because she couldn't have very many children, right? Only two. So Apollo and Artemis decide that they're going to seek revenge for their mother because Niobe was kind of making fun of her, the fact that she was infertile and couldn't continue to have children. So under the cover of darkness, Apollo and Artemis sneak up with arrows and decide to kill all 14 of Niobe's children. Terrible, right? Basically slaughtered them. On the back of it, it's a whole different scene. So the left-hand side shows Apollo and Artemis, who are killing the children of Niobe. And on the right-hand side, you have the back of the vessel, which is Hercules, surrounded by Athena and the heroes of Marathon. And they're completely placing themselves under the protection of Hercules. Really, really beautiful. If you look at the banding around it, too, it's a lovely piece. All right, let's move on. All right, sculpture. Archaic sculpture, when you look at it, the first thing you should notice about archaic sculpture, of course, is the fact that it's rigid. And it should remind you so much of Egyptian sculpture, right? That foot forward, and really that foot forward is representation of stepping into the afterlife. So instantly, this should tell you that these are funerary, much like King Menkuri and his queen, Camernebt. They're funerary, right? They're stepping into the afterlife. They're still connected kind of to the block or a base, but they're not necessarily carved into that base, only put on a base to support them and help them to be freestanding. So they've kind of been freed from the block, but they're very rigid, right? They're stepping forward. They've got clenched fists at the side of their body. They have these strange archaic smiles. And the only big difference is that they're nude, completely nude. And of course, not necessarily the women, right? Okay, so we're going to look at them, the Kore and the Koros. And here's the comparison. When you look right here, so very similar. So we're seeing the influence of Egyptian sculpture on archaic Greek sculptors, which kind of indicates that they must have seen the sculpture of ancient Egypt. Right. So here's the Koros. When you look at him, he's got very stylized plaited hair, which means braided. He's got all of these features that we're seeing in ancient Egyptian sculpture. He was created with marble, and he's extremely idealized. It is not an individual person. So all of these sculptures have a tendency to look the same. They're not representational of the person that is buried underneath them or in the tomb with them. They're just very kind of ambiguous, if you will. And they're youthful, very youthful. They're not representing a realistic view of a person. So even if you were 65 and died, you would have one of these Koros or a Kore entombed with you. All right. Here's that archaic smile. I want you to remember this piece. I want you to remember this piece right here. Because when we look at Etruscan art, it's pretty much like they took a mold of this face and put it on the Apollo sculpture that we'll look at in Rome. All right, so this is the peplos kore. Peplos literally just means a robed garment. Peplos, right? It's her robe, it's her dress. You notice that her left arm is missing. She's from 530 BC, and she was found near the Parthenon. And they really speculate that that left arm was actually outward, and it was holding some sort of container that worshipers could come and put some sort of offering for Athena, right? So this one, even though the Koros that we looked at were funerary, this Peplos Kore is not funerary. In fact, they think that she is involved with worship of the cult idol at the Parthenon, which is pretty cool. Something amazing happens right in the severe period, that time right between archaic and classical. So you can call it severe or early classical, but contrapposto all of a sudden takes into account that we human beings have a spine. And Polykleitos comes up with this canon of proportions, or this canon of, and a canon is really just a set of rules on how to create something. Like having one shoulder down, having a hip jutting to one side, having a relaxed stance on the leg that's not weight bearing. And Critias Boy is the first time ever that a sculpture has this kind of naturalized stance. Created in 480 BCE, known as being part of the severe style, and it was found at the Acropolis as well. Critias Boy is not included as a required image in the AP Art History curriculum, but he's so monumentally important. It's important that you know about him in order to reference him in case you get a question about sculpture and they ask you to do some comparing and contrasting on the AP exam. Right? So this is the first sculpture from ancient antiquity that we know to have used contrapposto. All right, contrapposto. When you think about it, look at the difference between Doryphorus, the spear bearer, and the Koros. The Koros is so rigid and upright. And when you look at Doryphorus, he's got this zigzag way of kind of standing. This is really the way we all kind of stand in this relaxed stance, right? Much more realistic. That one leg bearing the weight, The non-weight-bearing leg is very relaxed and kind of dangling. I want you to notice something about his right leg. There's a tree trunk attached to it. What the heck? There's a tree trunk attached to it because sculptors did not know how to create balance yet in their sculptures. So as they're sculpting, they're thinking to themselves, I need this sculpture to stand up when I'm done. And the only way they could think to do that was to create something heavy on that opposing leg. And so they would often use a tree trunk, which is kind of funny to me. Eventually, they become free from the tree trunk. We'll see that. All right, so here's Dory Forrest. He has this amazing S curve in his body, the complete pinnacle of contrapposto. Remember, contrapposto was invented by Polykleitos, and this sculpture in and of itself was created by Polykleitos. It is the most replicated sculpture by Roman artists. They see it in Greece, the original probably cast in bronze with the lost hollow wax casting method, and of course, eventually melted down, but it's replicated over and over and over again. It becomes a status symbol in ancient Rome to have a replication of the Dory Forest in your garden, in your courtyard, in your entryway. So it was kind of a status symbol. All right, so here we are. Here is the Acropolis, and this is a picture, a present day picture. Pretty amazing, right? We have all of these ruins here. Here is the Acropolis up here, literally on this rock that's jutting out of nowhere. And this is really active, amazing, full of life, markets and restaurants and music and people. And right up there on the hill is the Acropolis, right? We know that Ictinos and Callicrates are the architects responsible for the Acropolis, and we know that they're employed by who? Anybody remember? That General Pericles, right? They're employed by Pericles, and he kind of commandeers them and gets them to design plans for several temples and civic buildings that are sitting up on top of the Acropolis. We have the Parthenon, we have the Temple of Athena Nike, which is this little pint-sized powerhouse, right? We have the Erechtheion. We have all these other buildings that are sitting up here on top of this hill for all the world to see. It was this great sense of civic pride for the Athenian people after defeating the Persians to look up on this hill and see this incredible, incredible mountain of progress, and this mountain that reminded them of victory over the Persians. A great sense of civic pride. Here is Pericles. Pericles was actually made fun of by people. They actually had a Greek word for it that basically meant like squash head. And so he never ever took off his helmet because he became so embarrassed that people made fun of his elongated or oblong head. People have been bullies since the beginning of time. Isn't that terrible? So here's Pericles, very well respected, a great, great leader for Athens, led them to victory, was the founder of democracy, implemented democracy into Athenian culture and society, employs Ictinos and Callicrates, the architects. Phidias was the sculptor. All right, so keep that in mind. Temple parts you need to be familiar with. The pediment. The pediment is the triangular shape that sits on top of any structure, mainly Greek temples, but we're also going to see it in Roman temples. This was the area where most of the sculpture was contained. We know that the inside of these temples was used for the cult statue, like Athena. Some other parts you need to know. Sorry, I keep moving this little screen around. But you need to know the pediment. That's the triangular shape full of sculpture. Then you need to know the frieze. The frieze sits just below the pediment, and this frieze is just filled often with sculpture. Sometimes it just has decorative items here, like the triglyph and the metope, but most of the time it's just filled with sculpture, especially on the Parthenon. It's got the Athenian processional, which is beautiful, the pantheonic processional that's happening. Oops. Then you need to know the capital. The capital is the top of the column that distinguishes style. Doric being very plain, Ionic being swirly, curly, like the wave and the wind happening on the ocean. societies of Greece. And then you have Corinthian, which is very ornate with these great big acanthus leaves. Then the column itself, some are fluted, like Ionic are always fluted. Doric tend to be very, very flat most of the time, except at the Parthenon. And then column base. Doric columns set directly on the foundation of the temple called the stylobate. When you look at Ionic and when you look at Corinthian columns, they almost always have a column base that sits on the foundation of the temple, but not in the Doric order. All right, so here are the three types of columns and their capitals. Very, very plain, being the Doric order. A lot of people say that it's the masculine order. And then you have Ionic. These swirls are supposed to be representational of waves and wind, which makes sense because most Ionic structures originated in the islands like Crete. And then you have this Corinthian column that's ornate in acanthus leaves. All right, the temple plan of the Parthenon. We know that the Parthenon is all about mathematical proportions. And also, so it has this amazing mathematical proportion for its columns, right? 8-17. The interior, even though it's a Doric temple, right back here in the back building, there are 4 Ionic columns, which is interesting that they kind of put this nod to the Greek islands in the interior of the Parthenon. This area here is called the cella, and the cella is directly behind the pronaos. Remember, the naos is like the front porch, pro meaning beforehand. And then the naos is also synonymous with the word cella, Cella, which would be like sanctuary. And this is where Athena was in the interior here. So you have the pronaos, and then you have the cella, and then you have, this was the treasury in the Parthenon, right? So that's kind of the floor plan. So we know that Iktinos and Callicrates were responsible for the architectural plan. We know that Phidias created the sculpture, both in the frieze and the pediment. And here's what it would have looked like in its glory days. Yes, they painted it. It was made of almost all of marble, which was really unheard of in the day. They would paint it, they would create it out of marble, and then they would add pigment, and they would gilt it with gold leaf. So imagine if it was pure white, sparkling marble, and it had gold leaf and blue paint sitting up there on top of the Acropolis. Amazing. It would be quite a sight to see from all around. The east pediment of the Parthenon, right? The pediment being that triangular shape that sits up top. This is where one would enter the Parthenon. And this is the birth of Athena. Athena was actually born out of the head of Zeus. And the pediment sculpture that sat up in the top told the story of the birth of Athena. It was amazing in classical times. In this pediment, if you look way down in the corners, they didn't address it like we saw at the Temple of Artemis Corfu in archaic Greek sculptures. Good heavens. But right here, they knew how to handle this little tiny smudged down space. Instead of trying to make little tiny people, they actually made perspective, like something emerging from that space, like these horses coming forth from the corners of these pediments. All right, now we can move on. Holy cow, sorry about that, right? Who in the world is this? Here's this pint-sized powerhouse, this little Ionic temple with 4 columns in this pronaos. You've got this gorgeous sitting up on top, literally hanging off the edge of a cliff on the Acropolis. And just down from these steps was a little wall leading up to this temple. And that's where this beautiful sculpture was contained in the parapet. The Temple of Athena Nike, and it was, again, designed by Callicrates, and it has this amazing sculpture of Victory adjusting her sandal. Victory, also known as Nike, and Nike is almost always referred to as Athena Nike. So it's not only the goddess of victory, Nike, but the goddess of war. So victory in war. She has this drapery that's flowing from her, and she's very, very beautiful. Classical Greece, found on the parapet of the Temple of Athena Nike. This is the grave stele of Gesso, and this is really important because it tells us so much about the domestic life of ancient, sorry, again, I don't know why it's doing that, of ancient Athenian society, right? The importance of women, because you had to be male and you had to be a citizen of Athens to be considered a male to be considered a citizen, right? Women became important because they're going, oh my gosh, we need good women to marry so we can then have male offspring and have more and more and more Athenian citizens who have a voice in democracy, the democratic process, rules and laws that are affecting us as landowners. So this is Hyegesso. When you look at the curvature of her hand, this again was originally painted and holding in her little grasp right there would have been a necklace that she's taken out of this jewelry box that her maidservant is presenting to her. There's no necklace now because it was only painted on, and obviously this was 410 BCE. So, 2,500 years later, the paint has worn off, of course. But it really tells us a lot about ancient Athenian the domestic life. It was attributed to Kallimachos, which I think is kind of a fun word to say. He was the sculptor, made of marble, made to reflect kind of a structure. And right here at the top, you see this engraving. The engraving actually has the name of her father, not the name of her husband, not the name of her children, but the name of her father, claiming that Hyegesso is his daughter. All right, great big differences between Greek and Hellenistic sculpture. While they both have lots of drapery, classical sculpture is very relaxed and very reserved. It's not about showing emotion, right? It's just very kind of stoic faces, even though they might be in the throes of battle. They don't really have this anguish look or this elated look on their faces like we're going to see in Hellenistic sculpture. Hellenistic is all about emotion and energy and drama, and it's quite monumentally amazing to look at. One of my favorite sculptures of all times would be the Winged Victory of Samothrace. You can see it at the Louvre. You have to walk up about 40 steps and she sits up there. She was carved in situ, which the way that you see her here, there's a big chunk of stone that's carved into the shape of a boat. She was actually carved from the same block of stone, right? So anytime you see that, in situ means carved in place, carved from the stone that she's still attached to. She's got so much happening here. She was found on that island that I showed you at the very beginning, Samothrace, which is off the coast of Greece, but up near Turkey. She's got this windswept garment that's curling around her. Her wings are spread back. You see the feathers. You see the tension of the wind blowing back these wings. And it's quite beautiful. She was carved in order to commemorate a naval victory. And this was this big stone that you're seeing here. This stone is indeed the prow of a boat. You should know that she is also often referred to Nike alighting on the prow of a ship, which is kind of interesting. But that's kind of what she's doing, just standing kind of on the bow of the ship. Let's see, anything else? Oh, Samothrace was an Aegean island. Again, she was created to commemorate a naval victory, and it's supposed to be very, very theatrical. This boat was part of a fountain, so you would have the sound of running water as well. Yeah, believe it or not, Greeks invented hydraulics that they would use to channel and funnel water to create fountains, which I think is amazing. So she's on this Greek warship. It's all about movement, energy, wind, water, and then again, seeing her form, despite the fact that she is completely enrobed in this garment. Then we move here to this seated boxer. Seated boxer is probably one of my favorite sculptures just for its complete human rendering, right? Look at him. He's defeated. He's downcast. He is a real person who has experienced defeat. Look at his hands. They're wrapped up and bandaged. He has a broken nose. His eyes look like he's just so filled with anguish. I thought it was interesting that the artist decided to use um, inlay copper, as you see here on these gashes in his ear. His ear has gotten what they would call with boxers cauliflower ear because he's just been pummeled, had the heck beat out of him. And he's sitting here at this moment of defeat. Even though his eyes are empty now, at one point, most historians and art historians believe that he would have had inlay in his eyes that would have been made out of glass. So it would have been extremely realistic to walk around this sculpture and look into his eyes and just feel his anguish and his defeat. He is not idealized like you see in classical sculpture, but rather he's realistic, extremely realistic, very human in nature, which Hellenistic sculpture was really known for as well. All right, I think this is our last one. Moving to the great altar of altar of Zeus, and some people call it the altar of Zeus in Athena at Pergamon. It's part of Asia Minor, which is present day Turkey. It literally sits up on the edge of a cliff. What's most notable about this altar. It's an Ionic altar. When you look at the capitals, they have Ionic capitals, and it's not the typical fashion of a temple like we would see in mainland Greece. It has this amazing 144-foot frieze, right? It's pretty tall too. It's about 5 feet tall that goes all the way around, picks up on this side as well. This is actually a reproduction. The original altar of Zeus in Athena is no longer where it was constructed, but rather this is in Berlin, Germany. Why in the world Germans have it? It was all about who was funding archaeologists during the 1800s, and whoever found these architectural works could actually take them back to their home country. So poor Greece, a lot of their history is really strewn out all around Europe in different museums, and this is one as well. Of course, when you think about this altar of Zeus at Pergamon, what you need to know is this word gigantomachy. Gigantomachy is order out of chaos. It's this battle between the gods and the mortals, or gods and giants. And it's the war that's happening between the gods and the giants. So gigantomachy, this idea of gigantomachy used repetitively by the Greek people really to emphasize or communicate this idea of order out of chaos, which they want the Greek people to have utmost respect and utmost reverence for their military leaders and those people who are in power or control over them. And this was a great public way to display that. Okay, so I think that's about it. I'm also going to put a written kind of review that you can go through if you'd like. And good luck studying. I'm going to post the test on Monday. There is no school on Tuesday, so I just want you to take it sometime Monday or sometime Tuesday. And then we're going to jump into Rome on Wednesday, and we're going to do Rome Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. There's 8 images. We're going to do them all. So then we can move on into Art of Ancient Americas following that. All right. Hope you guys have an amazing weekend. I'm sorry about all the technical difficulties or little mess ups that happened in this, but I hope you enjoyed actually having some interaction. Have a great weekend and happy Halloween. Stay safe. All right, you guys. All right. Talk to you guys soon. Bye-bye.